Welcome to this episode of the ASQ Podcast, where we focus on life, leadership, and culture. On today's episode, we are unraveling leadership. Stay tuned.
Well, hello.
Hello,
And
how are
welcome
you?
to this episode of man, I gotta start all over again because I messed that up.
No, it's a funny thing. Why do you have to start why do we have to be so serious? Why can't we just be organic?
Why so
A
serious?
podcast is supposed to be like, we're having a conversation.
Yeah.
So leave it in.
Yeah.
Leave it in. Right,
Absolutely.
viewers?
You know
leave
what?
it in.
Absolutely.
Viewers, listeners, it's funny to hear us go. Blah, blah, blah.
Yes. Yeah. Wow.
All right.
Well, go ahead.
All right. See, I love it. Okay.
Mhm.
All right. So what are we talking about today?
So,
First of all, I want to say
okay.
high five on the whole. We're getting innovative here, which is something that we focus on, using our computers. Duh.
yeah, it is the 21st
Saving
century
trees.
after all. Yeah.
We're saving trees. We're doing our part.
Yes.
I like that.
Alrighty then.
I'm excited today because we're talking
yeah?
about my favorite subject,
Yes.
which is,
Leadership.
yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Okay.
And what we're doing today is we are unraveling leadership. I
Mm.
like that title.
Yeah, that's a very good title. You
Mm-hmm.
know, I mean, I always use the line, leadership is common knowledge, but it's not common practice. Like I like using that line because, and I think that there's an evolution of what leadership should look like and what leadership is. And I think that it's imperative for us to talk about it to actually get that idea of what it should look like.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
It's really when I think about it, I said this when I was in school too. I would write papers, or even with my dissertation, I was like, God, it sounds so elementary because this is stuff we should just know. But that's the problem.
Yeah.
It's people know what leadership is, but they don't really know what leadership is. So I know you said that line of that people know it, but they don't practice it. But
Yeah.
I think there's kind of a combination of the two.
Yeah, it is. But there's also, again, I give things a lot of thought, right? It's also, you have tradition thrown in there, right? Or what we traditionally understand a leader to be, or what a leader to act, and then where those traditions and those concepts kind of like come from, So you have that aspect, traditionally wise, but you also have the what do you call it? The innate desire of an individual to receive for themselves alone.
Oh yeah,
right.
Definitely.
So even with that, there's always something about the idea of understanding that not everybody's truly altruistic, and then we're building a certain desire. And if and as leaders or whenever we're put in a position of influence over others, right, we need to be aware of the reasons why. That's why it's important to unravel it, to really kind of like talk about it and see exactly, is this the way that we're behaving with our core workers, with the people that we supervise, with our families, with our communities. So it's a very simple subject because it kind of like implies a hierarchy type thing, but it's more in depth than that.
Oh yeah, definitely. Okay, so let's start with what leadership is. Well, you know what? Let's start with what leadership isn't.
That's a good point.
I think that's a great way to start. Okay. And I have just a few, there's so many things that leadership is not, but I selected 4 things.
Sure.
So the first one is that leadership has nothing to do with seniority or one's position in the hierarchy of an organization, which is what you alluded to. Number 2, leadership has nothing to do with titles. You don't need a title to lead. 3, leadership has nothing to do with personal attributes, right? And that's kind of iffy. I think there's a borderline thing there, but we'll talk about that later. And number 4, leadership isn't management. Leadership and management are not synonymous. Managers are essential. They're needed. But we need managers, we need them to plan. We need them to measure, monitor, coordinate, solve problems, hire, fire, and do a lot of those things. Leaders lead people.
That's a very interesting point, right? Because there are 2 different set of skills.
Yeah.
Right?
Absolutely.
And we tend to mix the 2 into one, right?
Yeah.
And I like the way that you separated the two, because it is important to understand the need to maintain a structure in a business or in an organization, because structure is important. There is no denying that. I mean, if we don't have structure, chaos ensues. So we don't want that.
Right.
So a manager is needed for that part.
Definitely.
Right? Leadership, it's about individuals. It's about the relationship between the individuals and the things that come about with the individuals.
Right. Definitely.
And,
It's more
you know,
it's more of a it's relationship.
It's relationship.
Building.
Correct.
Yeah, definitely.
Correct.
Okay, so then what is leadership? And I have a definition here. I kind of made this our own definition. I took a couple of definitions and I created this much sort of larger definition, but I thought all of these points were relevant. So leadership is the process of social influence, which maximizes the efforts of others towards the achievement of a goal. Leadership is inherently relational and dynamic, which we just talked about, not a static title of position. It involves the continuous active engagement of influencing others, not from a position of authority, but rather by inspiring and motivating others through their actions, behaviors, and communication, which consequently shapes the attitudes and behaviors of others.
Yeah.
Which in a nutshell is relationship building.
Correct.
It's how you relate with other people. It's a lot of what I love, emotional intelligence.
Correct.
Right?
Yeah.
So I thought that was a really good definition that sort of encompasses a lot of different dynamics, but really I think it does, succinctly just points relationships.
Yeah. And the thing is that it's like there's this modern idea of the boss, right? Like, you hear I'm the boss, and that's an authority figure, right? And those things in certain situations are important, right? They are, because again, we need structure, but too much structure and too much emphasis primarily on arriving somewhere, right, without the regards of the people that helps us get there. It's not only damaging to the overall outcome, but it's also damaging to the spectrum of society as a whole. I know that I've been in situations in which these practices of common respect, right, of that idea of listening to someone haven't really been practiced. There's been this authoritarian mentality of what it means to lead.
Definitely.
Right. So, but the reason I think for this topic, and we're going to get into it more, is it's that idea that we have to begin to transform our interactions with one another. Right? Because the world is changing, and it's changing really, really fast. Right. And what we perceive to be leaders, either be an elected official or your supervisor, your boss, or if you're running a company, right? What we perceive to be those leaders are great individuals. But if you look at our society and the outcomes, and you see the dissolution of the workers, of in that idea of not being able, right, to really listen, you see the consequence of that. You're seeing the consequence of it out there in society. Very, very few businesses have a culture that is innovative and challenging. It's really maintaining the status quo. It's typically people feel that this is only benefiting a certain group of people. Right. And for society to continue like that, and for an organization to thrive, there's gotta be a more, I don't want to use that word, inclusive.
How much you love that word.
Yeah. There has to be
But really, what is the word? Because that's really what it is. It's just bringing people together and working together, collaborating.
Yeah. Well, I don't know if it's particularly a word, but I think is what we do and what we have done, right? And in traditional leadership, is truly waste human potential.
Right.
We truly have wasted that. Right? Because the idea of a leader is to look at an individual and how do you get the most out of this individual based on what they're willing, what they're able and capable to give.
Maximizing
their talents.
Yeah.
So to the betterment of everything.
Yeah. Which I think that's a really good quality that you have. I love that you, because I've seen you do that a lot in your interactions, like when you worked at the Boys and Girls Club and different organizations. Like you were like, that was one of the things that really stood out for me.
But again, it's like, I don't think that there's another way, personally speaking, right? There are other ways, right? It has been proven that having an authority figure, right, brings results, right? Yeah. But there are consequences to that. Low morale, people are unhappy, right? People are frustrated. You know, they see something and you're not able to be heard. Right. So our society is changing and our world is changing, and we're getting more to this unity in terms of understanding that everybody could have a voice and everybody could be leading, contributing, right, to the overall objective of success for whatever the endeavor might be. Yeah. Right. Because it is important, even when you're in a situation, you know, because I mean, people know it. It's like there's this ivory tower, right, in which you have people on top making decisions, and then people in the middle manage. Mount Olympus. People in the middle, they just have to put it into action, and they don't understand exactly why, because the message, the vision, the clarity of it all hasn't been perceived, that hasn't been truly shared. So you just get the shit done, right? It's like you just gotta get it done and be quiet. I don't care what you have to say. I don't, you know, this is the traditional way. This is what you're seeing, such a poor retention of people, why people are so disillusioned because their voices are not heard in a place in which you spend the majority of your time.
It's like, what you're saying makes me think of, and I might be saying it wrong, but people don't leave their jobs because of the organization. They leave because of their...
No, people don't leave their job because of money. They leave because of culture.
Because of culture. That's it.
And that's the thing.
And that's what you're talking about, right?
And again, it's like, you know, to play the devil's advocate, on the other side is about, you know, let's say somebody started a business, right? I started this business because I want to make money, right? Yeah. And I agree with that premise, because typically you go into business to make money, to make your life much better, right? But that this is the limitation of sight of us as human beings, right? Because not only it is our responsibility to create, right? But we also is a responsibility that we have to the whole. Right. And this is the disconnect that I think the disparity between truly understanding leadership is all about, is that we have a capitalist system, right, which has done a lot of great, but it has also isolated and made people very, very sad and unfortunate, right? We have the highest rates of unhappiness, the highest rate of mental health issues, the highest rate of suicides across the board. Right. Even with people that make money, taking medications because they're unfulfilled, doing all this stuff because they're just exhausted. Yeah. Right. Yeah. They don't feel. There's this emptiness because outcomes. You know, I've seen it in nonprofits constantly, right? And I'm sure people have seen it in different organizations, right? Because there's a certain class of this super group that are creative, that they have the vision of something, right? But their vision, I think, comes from the desire to receive for themselves alone, without understanding the beautiful thing that has been given to them, to the universe, to be able to also empower others. Yeah. Right. It's an interesting balance between the two. I mean, that idea between the micro and the macro plays itself in leadership as well, because a leader needs to be able to understand that, yes, I have a personal objective, which is important. Right. Yeah. But there's also a collective. Right. Right. And that's the isolating issue of being a leader. Right. Right. Yeah. That island, because it's like, how do I balance what I want? Right. And also improve my circle in that society, human race as a whole, right? Right. And we see it playing out You know, we see it play it out on a constant basis. So I think that what we see traditionally, right, and then we're going to get into like the historical perspectives of leaderships, is that we typically are dealing with an archaic way of looking at life, right? A very centrist, individualistic way of me,
right?
The desire to receive for myself, right? And then we're seeing a transformation of a more communal way of being, right? I actually like that word communal rather than communal. Inclusive.
There you go.
Right? Because it is. It's like it's and you know, and this is what I've seen a lot of the times. Is like a lot of leaders actually lose a range of perspectives when you are removing people from input.
Agreed.
Right?
Yep. Absolutely. So before we move on, though, I thought this was really interesting because, you know, I mean, we started this whole podcast and asoulsquest with learning about education and, you know, educare and whatnot. And so I just thought that this was interesting. And you had added this in. It's the formal origin of the word leadership. It originates from the Middle English word lead, meaning to guide or to conduct, which is derived from the Old English word laden. The suffix ship is added to denote a state or condition, often indicating a position, role, or quality. Therefore, leadership refers to the state, position, or quality of being a leader or the act of guiding, directing, or influencing others.
Correct.
That's still like,
yes.
I didn't even have to do the other definition. That was perfect.
No, that is a perfect definition, right?
Yeah.
We guide. And that's one of the things that is very interesting about that I find interesting about leadership, right? And I learned this from Ken Mullen, my scout master when I was younger. That idea of allowing us to fail, helping us understand our failures and how to, and not even failure. It's like, what can you do differently? Right. What did you learn from this? Right. And forcing within us that authority, that self-regulating thinking process of how can I constantly improve? Yeah. How do I get better? Right. And then consequently passing down to others, right? So that they are able to be autonomous and make decisions that benefit the collective, right? And ultimately, when you do that, and this has been proven by Ken Blanchard in the Leadership and the Women and Manager series and all that stuff. The idea that as a leader manager, when you are guiding individuals in your organization, when you are providing, not dictating, but being able to ask them questions, how will you do this differently? And allow them to come up with their own answers, then you have more time to be more creative. Right? Because you are empowering others to really take ownership of what's happening. Right. And you have the flexibility to have more time to decide what you want to do, either create, expand, or do something different. Right? And even if they leave your organization, think about the exponential effect that has on the society as a whole. Yeah. Right? But this requires courage.
Very much. And vulnerability.
Yes, it requires courage, right? Because again, traditionally, right? If we're going to get into traditional leadership, it's like, you're going to do what I tell you to do. Right. Right? Yep. You're going to do what I tell you to do. Right? I'm the boss. Yep. Right? Yep. I'm the boss. You have no say in the matter.
Every time you say that, I get like, ugh.
Right?
I had a boss that did that to me and it was disgusting. I hated it.
It is, but it's
like, you need to remind yourself of that? Okay, cool.
We seldom forget that in the big scope of things, right? We're literally just suspended.
Yeah, I know.
I know that I say that all the time.
I know, but you're right.
But we have to constantly
bring it down
ourselves. We got to constantly remind ourselves that we live in a pale blue dot.
It's removing or being able to, like you said, to have courage and vulnerability to remove ego out of the equation when you're in a position of leadership. Yes. You know what I mean? And I think that is not an easy thing to do. It's a very humbling experience. And if anybody thinks that they don't have ego, you do. But just saying.
Here's the challenge. Right? Here's the egotistical issue that you have to deal with. Right? Is this illusion of the perceived power, right? Because there is important to know that, like, the will to power is key. It's very important to know what that means in our lives, right? I mean, I know Nietzsche wrote about the will to power. We should be one of our needs, right? To strive for power, to strive to get to a position in which we are the conductors of our own lives, right?
Of our own lives.
Yes. Right. Mm-hmm. So to be the Ubermensch, right? That was the idea behind it for us, to set our own values and set our own principles,
goals.
Yeah. So, but power is a very interesting concept, right? Because power is neither good nor evil, right? Power is just power, right? The idea is, how do you use that power, right? Exactly. So one of the things that Kent taught me and Danny and George, when we were growing up, was the idea that a real power, everlasting power, right, is the way you influence others, right? Leadership, by the way that you live your life.
Yep, which we talked about.
Right? So if my life, right, it's meant to be about power for myself, right? But then that power I'm using to empower others to find themselves and then find the power within, right? That autonomy within.
Yeah.
Right. Then collectively, what we have is an opportunity to create something great. I didn't say that that's going to be the outcome. I said the opportunity to create something great, right? Because then the managers has to come in and then we have to structure it, make sure that everything's fine, and we'll continue to grow.
Right.
So, but most organizations focus primarily on growth and expansion, and that's the main objective. And that's why we have to evolve our thinking and the way that we see things. Right? We have to start looking at the purpose of life in a different kind of lens.
Yeah.
And that requires courage. And then it's like people, well, but that's a like out there thing, It's like, but business is business. I got to make money, and it's like, yes, but at what cost?
Exactly, at the demise of humanity, essentially. I mean, I don't want to be poetic and be all dramatic, but literally, there are people. I have been in that position where I've gone to work and cried before I went into the building because I was like, I feel suffocated. I can't be creative. I'm not given input. I'm not communicated with. I'm not able to contribute in a way that makes me feel empowered. I don't have autonomy. I'm constantly told, by my boss that he's reminding me he's the boss, so it's like it's suffocating people. That's the way. And I said that actually in my book. It suffocates people. It suffocates them because you have to work. You need your paycheck. You want to have you need your job.
Yep.
But
to survive.
So you have to risk. You got to. Something's gonna suffer.
Yeah.
And that's sad.
And you know what? The interesting thing is, right? To this morning, I was touring a local, the Up Center. Thank you, Sean Howell, for inviting me over to take a look. And the Up Center is a place where people could go buy groceries that are, if people are under the poverty line, they could go in there and get groceries and things like that. And one of the things that he told me, and I wasn't aware of this, is like there's an 88% poverty rating for peers, and it's a 44% poverty rate in St. Lucie County, right? And then you couple that with what's happening in our country, and you couple that with what's happening with the homeless crisis, and you couple that with financial instability, and you couple that with all these different things, right?
Yeah.
It's a scary thought, but right?
It's a lot.
It's a lot to take, kind of like take in, right? And we're trying to find just our own little thing, right? And that's like the big macro thing. So when you start thinking about that, oh my God, how do I change that? How do we change that big macro thing, right? And the idea is like the macro is going to stay there and it's eventually going to change and it's going to get better.
Yeah.
But it starts with people understanding what you really are a leader, right? Yeah. That you are the leader of your circle of influence.
That's right.
Right? And some of us have more influence than others, right? And that's just scope. It doesn't mean that it's better than, in my opinion, but there is scope, right? We have a certain level of influence, right? And we have to be aware, self-aware, back to your social and emotional intelligence portion, right? Of the true meaning of leadership, right? The outcomes of organizations are key, right? Because you need to measure if you are being successful or not, right? And that's what they're there for. how would I say it? That's why they're there to measure your success, right? But it's not. This is like the main what I'm seeing is that this is the thing where we're living off, right? We have to grow. We have to make money regardless because we have to meet this. If we don't meet this, it's going to be the end of us, right? It's like that's the thing about what we do on a regular basis that takes us away from being true leaders in the sense of it, right? So I was looking here about the traditional historical perspective when it comes to leadership. You know, how has the concept of leadership evolved through history, right? And the idea is that it's like at first, right, we were hunter-gatherers, right? We were nomads walking around, and the agriculture came in, and we all came together, right? Because it was easier, better life expectancy. We all have different roles, right? And typically we had someone that we follow someone, or because they had the stature, the physical thing.
It was like I think we alluded to that, like tribal leaders and in those positions, like that kind of thing. You know,
and you had that idea of the stronger person. And you know, the things involved with technology. Now you think about people that are brainy, but not as strong, and then you gain power and things like that. So we always are looking at individuals like that, right, to lead the way. Right? The beautiful thing about our society, right, and the promise of the West, of Western civilization, right, is that focus on the individual idea, the individual capability of dictating and managing their own life, right?
Right.
And the other part I think that was let out of that is the fact that by you being whole, you also influence the world for right? If you're feeling good. Now, I have to add in here a caveat, right? Is it for the good of others or the good of the collective? Meaning, not just the human race, but like the world that we live in.
Right.
Right? Or is it going to be for the desire to receive for you?
Right.
Right? And that's the paradox when it comes to why we experience such horrible experiences with quote-unquote leaders.
Right.
Right? It is because what is it for? Right? Is it just for me? Or is it because I want to make this place a better place? Right? So traditionally we see that the strength is something that is valued in a leader, right? Power is something that is valued in a leader. But we are seeing that too in how us as a nation and how the world is viewing us as differently, because we have used power outside of the states to make our influence presence felt, and we are seeing the blowback, right, from that use of power, right? So this is what I'm saying: that power is a very finicky thing, because eventually it's going to come back to bite you if you use it in the wrong way. Right? And you're going to struggle like hiring people. You're going to struggle because you're creating a culture in which it's just for me,
right?
You know, so that's tradition. That's what we have experienced. That's what we have seen tradition. And then you have your other leaders, right? Like a Jesus, like a Buddha, like a Muhammad, you know, that have a different perspective on how the world should operate in terms of kindness, of collective. You know, Lao Tzu and Confucius were the same. You know, the collective, the collectiveness, right? But and that's probably on the East, but on the West you have Muhammad, you have Jesus, and they were individual and collective from their reference point, right? That important connection to God as an individual, right? But then the impact of that individual within the collective. You know, that's one of the beauties that I like about the Abrahamic religions when it came to a broad thing. Right. So those are historical perspective in which we've seen. Right. And if you look at history and somebody that's very cynical and somebody that's probably very data driven, they will say, well, what's really worked, those ideas of Jesus and kindness and things like that has not worked. Right. And that collectiveness idea of helping one another has not worked.
Right.
Right. And he hasn't to the point that he could. And it's primarily because we see power as a Darwinian. We see life and leadership as in a Darwinian point of view, right? But when we think like that, right? When we think from that Darwinian point of view, survival of the fittest, you're going to do what I tell you to do, that authority power, right? Which you only see in humans.
Of course.
You don't see that in the animal kingdom.
Mm-mm.
You don't see that.
Because if you think about like a pride, a lion,
Correct.
like a pride, right?
Mm-hmm.
How does that work?
Mm-hmm.
Yes, you have a leader. You have the lion. He's the leader. He's
he's the security guard.
Security guard. The lioness. Okay. But they all, whenever they go, I'm talking in terms of like when they're hunting,
mm-hmm.
how do they do this? It's not just the leader that does it.
No.
They do it together.
Collective.
The leader gets into the thick of it
mm-hmm.
and they have a plan, a strategic plan.
And they communicate.
Mm-hmm. And they collaborate. What was the word you just used for being inclusive?
Communal.
It's a communal effort
mm-hmm.
that they all come together
mm-hmm.
to get this prey.
Yeah.
And when they don't get it, they're not like whatever. Mm-hmm. They take it in the chin and they move on. They keep it up. They keep doing what they're doing. And that's the thing. It's interesting because animals don't do that, and they're animals.
Yeah, and there is a certain hierarchy. There's a pecking order on who's going to eat mm-hmm. first and who's going to eat last. Yeah. There is such a thing, right? Mm-hmm. And it's understandable because everybody's at different stages, mm-hmm. but nobody goes without.
No.
Number one.
Mm-mm.
And number two, there is no animal in nature untouched by humans, right? That destroys
mm-hmm.
what, their source of food.
Yeah.
They pick the one, the weak. Mm-hmm. But we have this Darwinian mentality when it comes to leadership, right? When it comes to superiority of one person over the other. Mm-hmm. And I think that's one of the things that historically has happened because this is kind of like what we have observed or learned from a very Newtonian, Darwinian point of view.
Yep.
Right? Of a very mechanical way. And then and this idea that people are not all created equal. No, I wouldn't say that we have equal outcomes, but there is that idea of superiority, because my perspective is not your perspective. In that aspect, we're not equal. We see the world in different ways, right? Mm-hmm. But that doesn't mean that my point of view is superior to anybody's.
Right. And isn't that what I know you hate this, but isn't that what DEI is all about?
No, that's not what DEI is all about. I don't really want to talk about that.
Okay, sorry, let's not go there. Just cut that out.
Yeah. That in theory it is, but it's not in practice. And that's
okay. Cut it out.
Yeah.
Okay, so basically what we're talking about, the historical
mm-hmm.
part of it is that perspective of that's how it used to be. It was very much a chief or the person was in charge and they shouted an order and everybody just did at the bottom, and that was it. Mm-hmm. So today, mm-hmm. leadership is a lot more democratic. There's more mm-hmm. women that are in leadership roles. Mm-hmm. Also, leadership isn't just about the person that's at the top. I mean, you were running the Boy Scout troop that you were in when you were how old?
13, 14,
yeah.
15.
And so people at that age are leaders. Mm-hmm. Moms in their homes, with their children, mm-hmm. things like that. And so I think there's a different way of looking at leadership as opposed to the traditional way that people want to look at leadership. This person's he's in charge. Mm-hmm. They're the leader of this company and we have to do what they say. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? And
what's interesting to me, right? Because there's a lot of like in blue collar workers, right? In particular, because I've been looking and talking to a lot of different people in the last few months. There's a certain order that they create, right? And there's a certain test as to the level of trust and how you're going to be. And there's a certain level of cooperation and expectations in cooperation, right? Because, for instance, if you're working on a house or something like that, and you're being unsafe on one side, right, it jeopardizes people on the other side. So there's this level of accountability, but also this level of trust in the fact that you are capable of doing what you are supposed to do, and that you are trusted to be able to. You are trusted and you're expected to do it, mm-hmm. right? In that particular way, because it is important for you to do that, right? And you see that in certain things. I think that it's sometimes when we get too theoretical in our heads about how things work, too educational, right? Too pragmatic about things, we start to lose the focus that at the end of the day, it's all about connection, mm-hmm. right? Connection and guiding, right? because you can't be a successful carpenter or stonemason without having a teacher or understudy that teaches you the things. So eventually you are capable of doing it on your own and doing it well, right? So if you take, let's talk about one of my favorite leadership styles, right? Which is situational leadership, right? You start learning, you start directing, because you have to be able to be instructed at first as to what to do and the processes and the things, right? Then from directing, you go into supporting, and supporting looks like, so what did you learn? What can you have done differently? Okay, you did it well. I keep doing, hey, why don't you try this? Why don't you try that, right? Then you go into coaching. And coaching is one of my favorite stages, right? Because in coaching, you really are helping them solve problems for themselves, right? Based within the scope of what you are accomplishing together, right? So coaching asks a lot of open-ended questions, active listening, make sure that they understand, right? This is the foundation of coaching, and then you go into delegating, right? And that's the beauty of this process, particularly situational leadership, is that you go from directing, right, to delegating, which in essence is directing to self-reliance. And when a person is self-reliant, right, there's very little redirection that you have to do. There's very little motivation that you have to put into that person, right? Most self-directed people really truly recognize what's in it for them, and they're able to give themselves that props, right? And they are satisfied and happy when their individual needs are met, but also when the collective are met, right? But somewhere down the lines, again, that requires that process just right there, because we could talk about transformational leadership. We could talk about what are some of the leadership styles?
Authentic leadership. Gosh, now you're going to ask me that? That looks bad. Transformational, transactional, authentic, servant leadership. Servant leadership is one of my favorites because that is what you're talking about, is that leadership perspective where their motivation as a leader is to build other people up, to be collaborative, to build relationships, discover the talents that they themselves don't realize they have of that other person, and to maximize that potential in them so that they see that in themselves and build them up, which is what you're talking about with the situational leadership.
And for me, I always
ethical leadership. I'll keep saying them.
Yeah, I mean, situational leadership to me, actually, it's one of the most effective ways that I've used when I had the opportunities of leading people, right? So most of my experience have been, Boy Scouts, middle management primarily, and then some admin work as well, right? But situational leadership is really, because it's a practical thing, right? Let's say you have an organization or you hire somebody new, right? That person is excited. They're very excited. They're starting. But even if they went to school and they have the theoretical expertise, they don't know your ways. So you have to spend time with that person directing, explaining to them and showing them the culture, showing them everything, the processes, both from the HR point of view, but also from the process of what you're doing, right? And showing them that. So, hey, I do, let's do together now. Now you do, and let me support you. Okay. Okay, great. So that's when you start using things like redirects, right? This is when you start using 1-minute goals. This is when you start praising people for what they do, right? Instead of being a seagull manager that comes in, dumps on people, and then leave, right? So all these techniques are available, right? And then when you get to coaching, that's when you start getting more into the the servant leader type, right? Leadership, because in there is when you try to get them to really maximize their knowledge and their faculties of thinking, and really what they're capable of doing is by saying, what could you have done in this situation? What are 3 things that you've done in the past that you could do now? And they become empowered. And once a person is there, right, and you are able now to delegate, right? I remember one time I was in one of those schools, and one of my leaders we had a meeting with the staff one day, and he said, "Can you come with me? Because we're having a meeting with the staff." And I'm like, "Sure, no problem." And I'm like, "I'm not running this meeting. You are." Matt Burgos. Hi, Matt. How are you? And I remember one of the principals there said to me, like, "What are you doing here?" And I'm like, "Nothing. He just asked me to be here." And I said, "You don't have to be here." So like, "I know." It's like, because I entrusted him, showed him what needed to happen, right? And even though he didn't believe in himself, right, he just asked me to be there so that he could gain that belief. But I fully was aware that he was capable of it, right? But again, that takes courage.
Mm-hmm.
It takes a vulnerability. Mm-hmm. Plus, it takes the experience of knowing that somebody did that for me and showed me how to do that.
Be humble enough to admit that. To say that, yeah. And I think also it takes a lot of I just lost what I was going to say. But anyway, yeah, being humble and acknowledging that I don't have all the answers, and I might have the answers in the people that are on my team. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And I think that's really relevant. And I think sometimes leaders often things that this is the philosophy, right? I'm the end all be all. I know it all. I have all the answers, and this is how it's going to go. I mean, I have worked for people like that, you know, and it's a shame, you know, and I know oftentimes I'll get colleagues who have asked me, like, you're the leadership expert. What would you do? And I'm like, typically speaking, it's not even about it's not a theoretical perspective. You didn't have to be educated in leadership to understand that people are people and everybody has their unique talents. Correct. And that if you tap into those, imagine what your organization could be like.
Yes.
As opposed to what it is like now.
Precisely.
And I think that if it's a lot of ego that's involved there, and I could get passionate about this and start getting all whatever. We can go on and on and on. No, I'm just saying, like, this is what we do this, so you get it all out. No, but I'm just saying, like, a lot of the times it's just, we've already talked about it. That's why I'm not trying to rehash it, but it's just a lot of individuals that are like that have that philosophy of leadership don't understand the devastating effects that they have on their people in their organization. And thus those people end up taking it into their homes, and then the people in their homes feel it, and it just starts to like, I was going to say a butterfly effect. It's exactly that. And it infects the community. And I know that's what we're talking about, because we talk a lot about the micro and the macro, and that's where I'm passionate about leadership. But unfortunately, and I write this even in my book, in some cases you have to learn to have to say, gotta walk away from this. This isn't gonna change.
It's not gonna change. I mean?
But then walking away knowing that that's not the person or the way that I want to lead, and how am I gonna lead in the next chapter of my life, or wherever it is that I end up, or wherever I'm going. And some people have the choice and some people don't. I know some people are going to say, oh, well, that's easy to say, but and I get that.
Yeah. And you know what? This is what the fork in the road is for most people, right? Again, I was fortunate enough that I learned a lot of these techniques and ideas and stuff when I was young. I was very fortunate, and I was fortunate that I had people in my life that I looked up to that didn't lead me astray, right? But this is one of the things that happen in what you just said about people leaving situations, going to other places, right? And forgetting what just happened and perpetuating it again, right?
That too.
Because this is one of the things about, I'm going to get mine now. Now that I have power, I'm going to get mine, right? Without realizing the effect that it has on the micro. Most people underestimate Most people underestimate the values, right? Right? And overestimate their capabilities, right? Because when you underestimate the effect that you have on the macro, on the collective, right? Because, I'm just a person. I'm just going to get mine, right? You underestimate the impact that you have on everybody else, which we have to know that we cannot live with one another. It's It is a non-negotiable thing, right? Because we don't live in isolation, right? Everything that we do individually affects the whole. You may not see it and you may not believe it. You may find yourself to be insignificant, but it affects the whole, right? And that's really the vision, because leadership is all about the visioning of the small and the big, right? And there's a responsibility if one chooses to become a leader, right? And I want to end this, right, this conversation by giving you this little anecdote, right? So one of the groups that I met, that I work with, right? We were one of the guys comes up to me, two other guys come up to me, and they asked me, "Hey, Omar, we were arguing last week back and forth about leadership, right?" And I'm like, "Okay." It's like, "Well, I think everybody could be a leader." Right? That's what he says. And then the other guy says, "Well, I don't think so. I don't think everybody could be a leader, because look at all the bad people, and this and people have to be good in order to be leaders," right? And I said, "Well, here's my take. Everyone has the potential to be a leader, to lead people. Everybody has that potential. The question is, where are you leading them? Are you leading them because you want things for yourself only? Or are you leading them, right, because you want them to be the best that they can be, right, in order for them to benefit the whole, and consequently yourself?" It's a tough question.
I think that's a great call to action.
Yeah.
Great way to end our episode.
All right.
It's a very good question.
All right.
Yeah. Thank you for tuning into this episode. If you're ready for meaningful personal growth and transforming your business or organization, visit our website at asqempowermentservices.com for more information. Stay tuned for more exciting topics.